So many people are focused on what is not there in their friendships that they miss what is there. And we are waiting for some arbitrary, unknown marker of we are friends to think that that connection is valuable in our life.
What if there are things we never had the opportunity to learn? We've all been to school or training, but there are things they never taught us that actually make a powerful difference in life. I'm here to share with you all the pieces you've been missing: mindset, health, success, and more. And we'll all learn together from guests along the way. We may not have learned it the traditional way, but oh my goodness, let's keep learning how to do things differently. OMG Teach Me crew, here we are again. I am excited about this episode. And interestingly, I don't think this is something that we talk about very much. And once I realized that, it just seems sort of strange that we don't. And that is friendship. So, have you ever thought about how do we even learn how to make friends, or maybe even tougher, keep friends? What do we do when we argue with our friends? How do we handle it? Is it as important as people say that we have friends? We're going to talk about all of that because we have an expert with us today. And really, especially after the pandemic, over the past few years, how we keep up with people and spend time with people maybe has changed. So, even more important to talk about friendship. So, my guest today, Alex Alexander, is a founder, speaker, podcaster, and soon to be author, which is exciting. Her work focuses on community and friendship, and specifically, that's how relationships are working or not working in our everyday lives. So, her work will leave us with tangible examples of how we can build our own version of a support system that really feels good. And all of that sounds like something amazing. So, welcome, Alex.
Thank you so much for having me, Cheryl. I'm so excited to be here.
Excellent. I'm excited to have you, and I'm excited to talk about this too. And listeners, Alex and I chatted before this when we were deciding what we wanted this episode to be about. And so I know this is going to be a good discussion because it was just all kinds of great information. But let's start where we always start, and that is tell us a little bit about kind of your story. How did you end up working on your podcast, your book, everything you do related to friendship, related to relationships? How did you end up having this focus?
I like to say that I fell into this. I never could have anticipated that. But I also think I was always meant to be here. It's a weird thing to say. It's been a windy journey. I had a pretty terrible family of origin situation. I grew up in a house full of substance abuse. My mom passed away when I was 13. I basically had to raise my two much younger siblings. And I didn't realize it at the time. Many, many years later, my sister, who is 8.5 years younger than me, we've like reflected back, and she said, that must have been so lonely.
Yeah.
And I don't think I knew it at the time, but it was. And I shouldered a lot of that on my own. But in my teens and my college years, I really leaned into friendship. Somehow I just intuitively knew we weren't supposed to do this alone. I basically built myself a family out of friends. And at the time, I was a wedding planner who was in the midst of burnout. I started a food blog. And in the background of the food, I would always share about getting my friends together. Like that was the whole point. And people would message me and say, it's really great. You can tell me how to cook dinner for 10 people. But how do you have 10 friends? And this is such a focus for me that I had no idea that other people were struggling with this, to be really honest with you. I also, at the time, didn't know that I was approaching friendship differently. But I have since realized that I think, when you're so desperate, basically, when this is your only option, you get creative and you keep trying even when you fail, and you push through awkward conversations and interactions and failed friendships because it matters. So I really kind of found my way here. It seems like a really fitting path, but man, was it a journey.
Yeah. Yeah. It sounds like it. And kudos to you for creating something positive out of that, because I can only imagine that sounds like it really was a tough way to grow up. And as you were saying that people said to you, how do you have 10 friends? That really kind of hits me when you say that, because it does feel kind of this, I feel this like forlorn, sad feeling like, how do you do that? You know, and I do think that would be a common issue that people would talk about, maybe even more so now, as I was saying when I started this episode. So, yeah, it's a big deal.
It is. I mean, the stats on loneliness are staggering. And I really don't love to focus too much on the stats because, to be like, the more I talk about this stuff, the more I realize so many people think that it's just them, like that they are the problem. And because we're not having conversations around it, a lot of people don't realize that, half, if not more than half people in the room they're in are feeling the exact same way they are. And once I start talking about friendship and once I start saying things like, friendship's a habit and a skill you've never been taught, or a lot of people are struggling with this, or once I start saying those things, it's like, Cheryl, it's like the floodgates open. People are dying to talk about this, but there just aren't that many spaces to talk about it. And that's really what I'm trying to do. I mean, people can say I'm a friendship expert. I've spent a lot of time thinking about this stuff and reading about it and talking to people about it. But really, I just want to be a conversation starter. That's my whole goal.
I love that. Yeah. And two things come to me as you say that. Number one, it's kind of the ultimate comfort for us as humans to know that we're all together in the same boat. Like, that's definitely a comforting thing. But number two, to admit out loud that we don't have many friends feels so, I don't know, embarrassing and vulnerable. So, yeah, having this conversation and saying what's wrong and realizing we often all have the same issue is a powerful thing for sure.
Yeah. And just to add to that, for anybody who's listening, like some people will say they don't have any friends. The other thing I find is that people have friends, but something has changed in their life. And the friendships they have, like they need to add something to their friendships. All their friends have moved away and they feel guilty admitting that they want friends who live close, or they've recently had a kid and they feel guilty admitting that although they have all these great friends who don't have children, they want friends who have kids who understand this. Or on the other end, their friends all still have kids at home and they're the first ones that are empty nesters and they feel guilty admitting, like, we want people who now have the same freedom we do. And that's not to say the other friendships don't serve their purposes, but some people have friends, but something is not quite what they need. And it's almost like you can't admit that because then you almost have to put this caveat of like, well, but I have friends and they're great and I love them so much. But, it would be nice to have other friends who had this flexibility. But my friends are great. My friends are great. And like, we shouldn't have to do that. You should be allowed to admit that you want to add something to your life.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Maybe it comes from the fact that I think as we get out of school, because in my mind, it's easier to make friends in school. That is such a sweeping
Yes.
generalization. I'm sure it's not always true. But past school, I think it's a little bit scary maybe to say, I want to make some new friends, because then the next thought is immediately, well, how in the world do I do that?
Mm-hmm.
And have I ever even learned how to do that? Or did I just fall into the friends I have? And this is something you said. How do we even know how to do this?
I mean, I don't think that saying that making friends in school is easier is that sweeping of a generalization. Like, I think that's a fair statement to make, is what I'm trying to say. Because when you make friends in school, quite often you're making friends out of proximity. You go to the same place every day. And over time, you build relationships with those people. And that is how most people learn to make friends. So if you end up in, let's say, an office job, you're probably going to make some friends with your coworkers. Maybe you'll make friends with some neighbors. Most of us make friends out of proximity, and there's nothing wrong with that at all. That's a great way to make friends. But as adults, we have so many more opportunities to put ourselves in places that we want to be with people who share similar interests that we do, or are in a similar life season, or have similar experiences, or goals, or a profession. We can choose. But that requires us being pretty active and choosing and showing up there and putting ourselves out there and taking risks and developing habits of following up and setting up time to see each other. And that is why I think it's harder to make friends as an adult, is because it's active. And we're never really
Right.
taught that, because most of the way you're taught to make friends is like, just go to school, just go
Yeah.
play with the
Good
neighbor
point.
next door.
Or play sports on the team or
Yes.
whatever.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Which I guess you can do as an adult if you are a sport type person. I'm not. So, but
Yeah, but you still have to actively choose to like join that league and go do that thing. And
true.
some people won't do that,
Yeah.
but you
That's
should.
true.
That's a great way to make friends as an adult, to anybody listening.
Yeah, and as you were saying that, I was thinking it feels like it almost feels like the same list I would have starting a business or trying to network with a business. And it's kind of strange to think about friendship that way. Like, this is my job that I need to do. However, if it's effective, we get so many benefits from it. So, good point.
It won't always feel like that, I don't think, right? When you develop these relationships and they start to really become ingrained in your life, you're not going to feel that same way. You're just like, oh, I got to see my friend. But in the beginning, it is like learning on any other skill set. It's, networking, starting a business. I always compare it to finance. Personal finance
Mm,
is something where you learn some fundamentals and you set up some systems and you automate some deposits. And then once you get used to, checking in every month or paying those bills, or you do your things at an increment, over time you really see a difference. And I think friendship is no different. You learn some fundamentals, you implement the habits in your life, give it a little time, and you'll see a really big impact.
yeah. This is bringing up something that I have done on and off that I was always embarrassed about and wouldn't have admitted until right now. But I used to make literally on a piece of paper a list of my friends that I wanted to
Uh-huh.
keep up with
That's not
because I
embarrassing.
would
I do that.
forget people.
Mhm. Mhm.
Well, the embarrassing part is, I guess, thinking that if this person is my friend, how could I forget to keep up with them? But I would literally make a list and then I would look at my list and say, oh, I better, message so and so. I haven't talked to her in a while. And that was the only way I could figure it out. So I'm feeling
I
better.
I encourage people to do that. I mean, I think we romanticize it, right? Like, oh, if they're my friend, then we should do this. What is the difference between making a list of your friends and, I don't know, scheduling a date night? That's super regular and not like, couldn't we all be saying, like, oh, well, if you love your partner, you should just want to go out? We all know that life gets in the way. Responsibilities come up. If we don't prioritize these things that matter, they'll fall down the line. And if the easiest way to do that is to have a little list you look at once a week on a scheduled block of time on your calendar, where you either send some messages or schedule some hangouts or make a phone call. Like, what does it matter? You're doing the thing. We're doing it in so many other areas of our life.
Yeah. Right there. I I just like feel this lightness from always feeling bad that I had to do that. And so I guess I was doing something good and I just was giving myself a hard time about it, which is certainly a thing that we do all the time about
We
many
all
things.
do.
And okay, so let's talk about kind of hangups like that, because another thing that I wanted to make sure that we could touch on is sometimes we sort of label ourselves as a good friend or a bad friend. I'm a bad friend. I don't this, I don't that. And I was trying not to be a bad friend by having my list and trying to remember people. So Where does that really come from? And tell us kind of how that happens.
Well, I mean, I think there's a lot of places that that comes from. Number one is the not talking about it, right? And getting in our head. I mean, look, you just feel lighter because I told you that I do the same thing. If we all start talking about this stuff, we'll realize that we're all just trying our best. We're all just trying. But the good friend or the bad friend, comes like I said, comes from a few places. You so much of when we're not telling our stories, so much of what we see modeled for friendship comes from TV, movies, social media. And all of those things are, designed to get good ratings, more viewers, more likes, more shares. It's not about how it feels, it's how it looks. And so
Mm,
I think a lot of people, because you don't have any normal stories of friendship, they're comparing themselves to what you see on TV. And because it's that very out there, dramatized, I would venture to say like extroverted version of friendship that's catchy, a lot of people will think that their friendships aren't good friendships because they're quiet or calm, or you hang out and you read together for hours at a time. You don't have that big friend group, but you do have this friend. Like what is out there is not good or bad. It's just one version of friendship, but there are many other versions of friendship. All that matters is that you feel good in your friendships. And then the final place that I would say you kind of get that good or bad label is there's so much talk about what you were saying earlier, following up with your friends, reaching out, reciprocity, all these things, and conversations that really give you like, this is the right way to be a friend.
yes.
And if you can't meet that marker or you don't, you're a bad friend. And I would argue that's not true. All that matters is that you and your friend feel good. It may look completely different than anything you've ever seen before. Quite often we have to ask, like, what is enough in a friendship? Because again, those big flashy versions of friendship are designed to draw our attention. They're not necessarily feasible. Similar to, I don't know, a perfectly clean designed house in a magazine when we all know we live in houses that have messes. But yet that's what we're comparing our friendships to, are those perfect flashy versions. And then you end up feeling like, well, I'm a bad friend.
Such a powerful point. I'm so glad you kind of made that metaphor, analogy, whatever, of the house, because nobody's house really looks like that. And I mean, anything we compare ourselves to other people on is usually not accurate, right? We don't know the whole story ever about anyone. That's powerful. I love a bit of sparkle and I love to feel a little bit girly, but I always struggled with manicures because either I would mess it all up before it was dry or the gel would be too hard on my nails. Thank goodness my sister introduced me to Color Street Dry Nail Polish. I can create a new manicure in minutes and I don't have to let it dry. Find Color Street at omgteachme.com/recommendations and check it out for yourself. Now, this brings me to something else. I was going to ask you about conflict, but let me take this in a slightly different direction first. What if you feel good in your friendship, but you don't really know how your friend feels? That feels like something a little scary to discuss. Do you have any thoughts or tips on that?
Oh, I think, I mean, my encouragement would be to discuss it. And that doesn't need to be so often I think we say things like that, like we have that conversation. It doesn't need to be some really intense, like you sit down and you stare straight at each other and you ask, how do you feel about this friendship? It doesn't need to be like that. It could be as simple as maybe you're a little vulnerable and you start voicing that you really enjoy this friendship and be specific. Say, I love that you're always down for a spontaneous adventure. I love that we try new things together. I love that I can just easily fold you into new parts of my life. Now, they may not reciprocate, but it's a good first try because they might start reciprocating and telling you some of the things they like about this friendship. And now you've created this space where it's casual, it's calm, it's not a big deal. You've kind of opened this door. You don't even need to bring it up another time, but you another time could say one of those things. And then you even could throw out something you wish was different.
Mm, I like it.
And then maybe they would feel like they could say something that they wish was different. It doesn't need to be these really intense things. It can just be verbalizing little things and be more aware of them. I mean, that's obviously a huge piece of it is if your friend voices something they wish is different and you are not paying attention or you don't take it seriously, then we're going to create a problem here. But if you try and stay open and curious about it, I would think that would hopefully create a really open dialogue.
I really, really love that answer because it does feel super weird and awkward to try to have this big, how is our friendship discussion? I don't think anybody wants to do that. So I like what you're saying is to talk about it, but in a casual way. And it, I could see how maybe the other person would feel more safe to say something if they had something they wanted to say.
Yeah, I think just trying to create a space that, and again, like some people may not want that. Some people might hear what I just said and be like, that's awful. And they'd rather have the serious conversation. And in that case, I'm not here to tell you what to do. Like, try to do the thing that feels right to you. But hopefully, if you do give that a try, if it does feel right to you, that could shift. I call this like your friendship culture. So with that friend, it would kind of set a new standard where you both could
Mhm.
verbalize out loud the things you like or the things you wish were slightly different. Or another one is like anticipating change. This happens. I in episode 4 of my podcast, I talked with my friend Sarah about this. At the time, she was pregnant, and we had all these kind of hypothetical conversations that they were kind of playful, like, oh well, when the baby comes,
Mm,
I it'd be so fun to fly down and see you. And it's not me asking her, but it's her being like, "Oh, that would be so great. I'd probably want a few weeks." And then like I think that would be super fun once my husband goes back to work and we could go on walks and we could do this and we could do that. It didn't even necessarily I actually was not at the time able to fly down for other reasons, but it created this space, right, where I was able to kind of get a sense of what would work. She thought
yes.
would be different even before the change happened. Might be something else people can try.
Yes. It's like a light hypothetical conversation. It's no commitment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it gives you some
Really
sense of when
smart.
the time comes, like what you might ask or offer.
Really smart. Now let's take this conversation theme further because something you said to me before this discussion we're having today was that we often don't learn how to handle conflict or how to have kind of, I don't even know if it would be an argument, could be an argument, but just a discussion about something serious that we might not disagree on. So let's say that we're kind of past this I want to share how the friendship's going thing and there's actually a conflict. What would you advise people to do? And tell me more about how we've kind of never learned that.
Well, the never learning is, people are talking about this with romantic relationships, how so many people, like fights happen behind closed doors. So you maybe saw the beginning of the fight and then you saw, it's probably parents for the most part, like you saw the resolution. Everybody seemed happy, but you didn't see what happened in the middle. And I think that quite often happens in friendship. Most of us, if our parents did have strong friendships, probably did that thing where they kind of did the fighting behind closed doors and you didn't see the process. Most people are not fighting. If you have other friends that are fighting, they're probably doing the same thing. They're probably not fighting in front of you. And maybe they are. You're just kind of seeing the resolution on the other side. And maybe you can ask a couple questions, but for the most part, you just don't really know what happens. So that's all to say that when conflict happens in friendship, most of us are learning how to deal with it through trial and error.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I just want to point that out to people because anything you learn by trial and error, there are going to be failures. There are going to be
Errors.
errors, like times where you didn't get it right. And so that would be my biggest reminder to people when it comes to conflict in friendship is don't expect that you're going to get it right the first time or the second time. Acknowledge when you feel completely out of your depth and you haven't had a conversation like this. Try and go into it with your friends, where it's like you and your friend trying to solve the problem, not you and your friend against each other. And like just continue to have conversation as much as possible. I think that I'm like what I want to tell everyone, Cheryl, and I know this is not everyone's. It's like I'm the friend that when something's wrong and it's in the air, the number of times I've just called a friend and been like, "Hey, we're not okay. This is the time. Like this is what I think I did wrong. I'm sorry I did that." Giving them some space to talk. Like I won't wait. I won't play it out. And I know that's
Yeah.
very direct and a lot of people won't do that. But in my personal experience, that is the best way to go about it if you can.
I agree, and at the same time, it can be hard depending, I guess, on our personalities and the
Mhm.
situation. I have said on this podcast before, and I can't remember the exact thing I was talking about, that it's always better to be direct and have the discussion and bring out whatever's going on because, yeah, we do feel a weird thing in the air sometimes, especially those of us that are have kind of empathy as our strength and can read that, and if we don't address it, it doesn't usually get better on its own.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, what I found is, again, like I'm not a therapist, right? I'm a person who wants to start conversations. So I can tell my experience. My experience generally is like, I always want to go into conversations like that, having spent some time thinking about where I might have contributed. I don't want to blame the other person. Something somewhere in there I probably could have done better, right? We're all failing all the time. I could have not pushed that button in that moment. I could have waited to have the conversation. I could have done this or that. Like there's got to be something small. And in the end, I want this to work with my friend. So I am happy to acknowledge where I went wrong, even if I maybe wasn't the one who actually like instigated this problem. There's probably something I could have done better. So I'm happy to acknowledge
Mhm.
that. I think it just creates a space where it shows like we're all going to acknowledge that things went wrong here. We're all going to acknowledge that. We're going to try and figure out how we work together to solve this situation. And that's like the mindset I always go into those
I think
conversations
that's
with.
great. Yeah, I think that's great. And it feels like I'm going to try to make a statement that actually makes sense here. It feels like our discussions just in general in life, everything has become so much more polarized in a
Mm-hmm.
sense, I think. And maybe it's politics that is causing that to happen. Maybe it's isolation. I don't know what the cause is, but I think you're giving us a good reminder that if we're friends with people, then just because we disagree on something or something went wrong or something's weird, we can still be friends with those people, and we want to try and we want to figure that out. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think a huge piece of it is deciding that these connections matter to you because then you're willing to fight for them instead of against that person.
Yeah.
And sometimes that connection might not be worth it. Like, I want to acknowledge that to people too. And in that case, like, that's okay. That's okay. And there's also such a thing, I don't think we talk about this enough, of like, sometimes I think it's good to just let a friendship kind of pause
Hmm.
and give it some space, especially if you feel like the other person has some things that they need to work on, or a friend is ruminating around a problem that they just keep going around and around and around and around on. Like sometimes you might need space. And friendships so often is seen as this, we just move, get better and better and better and up and up and up. But that's not the reality. Like there are these dips where we have this conflict. There are breaks and pauses. There are high peaks and then life changes happen and you have to adjust and like find a new peak. That's the reality of friendship. So if you think it's worth it, then figure out how to navigate the conflict is worth
Yeah.
it. And I always like to tell people, you got to choose your hard. Like it's hard to figure out how to navigate conflict with friends. It's also hard to make new friends. Pick your hard. And again, in some scenarios, making new friends might be the better hard for you, and that's okay. Go do that. Go do whatever feels right to you.
Yeah, and that's a good point because I think there can be, and you said this, there can be friendships that run their course,
Mm-hmm.
and this relationship maybe isn't making me feel good anymore. And
Mm-hmm.
at that point, it's okay to let that one kind of go away. And
Absolutely.
I actually am so glad we're getting to this because I don't think a lot of times people think that's okay.
Oh, yeah. I mean, you should. You're not a bad friend if you let it go. If it doesn't feel right, that's okay. And I do think there's a piece there, right? Where if you feel like friendship is possible, if you feel like you can make new friends, if you have worked on this skill set, when you identify that a friendship doesn't serve you anymore, you'll feel better about letting it go because you trust that you can go build what you need. So many people will not let it go because they're scared they'll never make a friend that will fill whatever that friendship filled for them.
Yeah. Yeah. And so basically, we're just bringing in, not just, this is important, we're bringing in the concept of abundance versus scarcity, basically,
Mhm.
right? And
Oh,
applying it to
100%.
friendship.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't like say that in a lot of places outwardly, but I think so much of what we feel about friendship and community and connection, like, is scarcity. So many of the phrases that we say out there are based in scarcity, right? Like find a few good friends and hold on tight. Finding a good friend is finding a four-leaf clover. Good friends are
Ugh.
hard to find.
Yeah.
There are
Yeah.
so many places where the scarcity is just normalized. And I get why, because we go back to the beginning. If you don't feel like this is an area of your life you can impact, it would feel like scarcity. So it's really, really powerful to invest in your ability to make and maintain connections because you will move through them more naturally in a way that feels good to you.
I love it. I love it. And it feels like this is sort of a point where we can pause and let me see if I can reflect back what we've talked about because it's powerful. And I'm going to try to kind of go general. So, what we're learning is we can always make friends. It's a matter of being open to that, wanting to communicate with people, wanting to interact with people, doing things that we like, and then being open to communicating with the other people doing those things, I suppose. And then kind of not putting labels on things and just being intentional and being present and deciding what we want out of the friendship and then just taking steps toward that. Is that kind of fair to say?
Yes. Yes, and I would expand on that like just to put, because I've talked about this stuff for a lot of hours, so I have some more direct words. I would just say like the piece about not putting labels on it is how do we say it? Like friendship isn't all or nothing. So many people think they are my friend or they are not my friend. It is an absolute, and that's not the case. There's an entire spectrum of friendship. Somebody can be a friend that you just go bird watching with. So,
Yeah.
somebody can be a friend that you just see at the gym. Somebody can be a chess friend, but you also can have those really close friends or the friends that have known you for a really long time or your college friends. And all of those have a place, and you can continue to build more of all of them. And you don't need to, okay, you don't need to stress. Well, actually, I'll put it this way. So many people are focused on what is not there in their friendships
Ooh.
that they miss what is there. And we are waiting for some arbitrary unknown marker of we are friends to think that that connection is valuable in our life when there's so much value before that moment. And most people, if I ask them what makes someone a friend, they can't actually tell me. We don't even know. We have some imaginary marker that we can't quite articulate, but it's not that. We're not there yet. So I'm like, so when will you be there? They're like, I don't know. I don't know. So you just keep focusing on what's not there. And that's really harming
Wow.
people and their connections.
I mean, there's our mic drop as we wrap up because you're totally right. 100% I see that. And I see, I mean, I'm thinking of people in my life who I do one thing with, and would I have called them a friend? I don't know. Like, what was the cutoff? But I enjoy doing something with them.
Mhm.
So why does it need a label? Well,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah, and they may not be, right? It's important to know that they may not be your closest friends. Like you may not call them for everything, but they do have value. And when you start to see the value that they have in your life and you have in theirs, you're more likely to invest in that relationship. And when you do that, that is how you make those closer friends. So there's nothing to say that that friend may not be one of your closest friends in 2 years, 5 years, 10 years. But you won't invest in it if
Absolutely.
you just keep focusing on how it's not there yet. And it may never get there. It's okay if it's just the friend you do the one thing with for a long time. That's valuable too.
I love it. Oh my goodness. So many things to take away from this conversation. Excellent. Thank you, Alex. Now, before I get on to my last question, let me ask you to tell us, how can people find you if they want to follow what you're up to, find out about this soon to be author thing, all of that.
Yeah. So you can find me. I'm most active on Instagram. At my handle is at it's Alex Alexander. You can sign up for my newsletter. I send out some pretty fun stuff. I don't post anywhere else there. If you go to thelesslonelyclub.com, sign up. And you can find me on my podcast. I have a podcast too. It's called Friendship IRL. Every week I release a new episode talking with someone about an aspect of their friendship that's working or not working.
I love it. And so, yeah, listeners, if you liked this conversation, then there you go. That's exactly where you need to be, is following that podcast as well. Perfect. Okay, now our final question, which I always warn people about ahead of time, and we were kind of chuckling about this earlier, so that you have time to think, is we have a nostalgia playlist, and I'm going to ask you, what is a song that gives you kind of good memories or brings back this feeling of nostalgia? And I know it's hard to choose, but tell me, what came to mind?
I had one that stuck out pretty quickly, and it is Wanna Be by the Spice Girls.
Awesome.
It just brings back these memories, I don't know, of like being younger and I don't know, dancing around in a circle with a bunch of friends and just like yelling that at the top of your lungs. And at the time, I don't even think I knew the significance of what that song was really saying. And now being, my husband and I are 14 and a half years together. Like, yeah, if you want to be with me, you better like all the other people in my life too.
I love it. And how appropriate for this, too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wonderful. That is a new one. We'll add that to the list. And thank you for joining me today, because as we started talking about doing an episode on friendship, I kind of looked back through the episodes of OMG Teach Me so far and went, wow, how have we never talked about this? Which is exactly your point. We don't talk about this enough. So I really appreciate you joining me, Alex. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for creating a space to talk about it. I love having these conversations.
Excellent. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. OMG, did you know that we have mini episodes every Friday as well? Make sure to follow OMG Teach Me in your favorite podcast app so you get all the goodies. And if you're just finding this podcast and you're kind of wondering where to start, I have a curated mini series for you to help you stop self-sabotaging, because we all do it. So head over to www.omgteachme.com and sign up when you get the pop-up box. We may not have learned all these things in school, but they sure are powerful now.